Welcome to Heal Your Shadow Relationships. I am your host, Neola Sparkus, and today we have with us the wonderful Michaela Boehm, and I am so pleased and honored to have you here, Michaela.
Thank you for having me.
Yes, so I'm going to tell the viewers a little bit about you. Michaela Boehm is among the most gifted counselors and teachers to be found globally today. Born and raised in Austria, Michaela combines her background in psychology with her in-depth training in the yogic arts into a magical brew of experiential learning. Since moving to the U.S. in 1994, she's been working with the world's best-known celebrities, including actors, producers, writers, musicians, and international business founders. Michaela began studying with David Deida in 1997, and in 2007 began co-teaching with him, focusing on the changing landscape of relationship in the 21st century. Michaela is currently the only counselor and teacher personally trained and authorized by David Deida. Michaela is passionate about teaching skills that enhance deep intimacy, strong lasting attraction, and give each participant the tools for full embodiment and capacity. She teaches women's workshops, intimacy, intensives for men and women, as well as mentorships and relationship counseling. Michaela lives and teaches on a small organic farm in Ojai, California, where the beauty of the land and animals inspire her students to reconnect intimately with themselves and others. So thank you so much for being here with us to speak about healing your shadow relationships. And I'd love to know what that term, shadow relationship, means to you.
Well, I'm Jungian trained originally. And so to me, there's a very specific connotation to the word shadow. But I've, of course, also learned over the years, particularly ever since I've been in the States, that it's a term that's thrown around in many, many different ways and meanings. And some of them useful, some of them not so useful. So for me, I would say that I look at our shadow, or the shadow in the relationship, as the unexamined parts. The parts that are not brought to the surface, that sometimes we don't even know about, but sometimes we know about and suppress. That's how I would use it these days, within the popular culture, and also, for ease of understanding.
Sure. Each one of our experts has had a whole different view on it, so I appreciate that was very clearly defined. And if we can't see or don't examine the material in the shadow, how do we become aware of it?
Well, I think we ourselves actually can't become aware of it. I think that the shadow, in a certain way, is our blind spot. And it's a combination of, cultural influences, our upbringing, our childhood wounds, old conditionings, and we are innately blind to them. So usually the only way that people get aware of their shadow is either with the help of a good therapist, or the reflection of a good, well-meaning community and friends, or, of course, and this is, I guess, where you come in the course of a relationship, where things become very apparent. Intimate relationship is probably the quickest way to be aware of one's blind spots.
Oh, yeah. So people who go into a relationship thinking, oh, from now on, everything's just going to be rosy because we're so in love and we're such a perfect match. And then suddenly, boom.
Yeah.
So this is where you come in to help people to teach them skills of how to cope with when the shadow comes up. Is that true?
Well, yes and no. Yes, because of course we all have to deal with our childhood wounds and our shadows and our unexamined areas. No, because I actually think that that's an ongoing process, and I don't think you actually heal that per se, as in, it will go away, never to be seen again. I think it's a bringing it into the light shining light on it, seeing the mechanisms of what's being done, and then finding creative ways to live with that and work around that.
Ah.
So, I'm not that concerned with these things going away because they're kind of woven in the fabric of who we are. And it's much more important to me in the work I do that we realize we have these things, we're well aware of them, and we have some humor and some love and compassion around them. And, and just live with them. I mean, when you were a ballet dancer and you broke your knee, or you really busted your knee and it ends your career, that's not the end of your life. You'll learn how to dance with a busted knee. You can still make beautiful art. You can still inspire people. You can still be inspired by your movements. It might look a bit different, but just because something's broken doesn't mean we're debilitated. And so I look at the shadow and the whole aspect around that as something that you learn how to be creative with and make beautiful art with.
That's such a beautiful way of putting it. I love that. So to me, that speaks to a certain level of self-acceptance that you just accept, yes, this is my trigger, my button, this is how I react. And there's no need to try to think that you are, well, I mean, it can be thought of as a flaw, but to think that you're flawed, no, this is just another part of the fabric of what makes me who I am.
Yeah.
But I have heard it said that our power lies in the shadow and the parts of ourselves that we don't know. So how can we release the power? How does that work? What is that dynamic? How does the power get held there?
Yeah, I would definitely think that's true. I think behind your greatest contraction lies your greatest opening, right? I mean, that to me is physics, pretty much. So meaning wherever we hold the tightest, when it opens, there's the most available. And often, and you see that, of course, in artists, right? The greater the spot, right? The greater the contraction, the greater the art and the gift behind it. And a lot of people who are very gifted artists have to work very hard on transcending that knot to open. And when they do, it's amazing, right? In musicians or in actors. So I would say that's absolutely true. And that's why it's so important to shine light on the shadow, so to speak. Not from a place of that's bad and it needs to be fixed, or even boo-hoo, this needs to be healed. It's more, if we want to talk about healing, it's more healing through the acceptance of that just being an integral part that also can be used and is very useful in many ways. And then the key is to essentially know what the contraction looks like and learn how to open through that through that clench, through that trigger, through that hold, so that what's behind it can be freed.
Well, I love this, so I'd love you to get a little bit more in depth about what does exactly that look like? Like maybe you can give an example from a client without naming any names, to just give us an example of a type of a contraction, and maybe specifically in your work, how you would work with somebody and how it looks when they work through it and when that energy is freed.
Well, I think a very common one that's easy and that's not too personal to anyone, including myself, is I fall into that category too, is people who actually don't like to perform. Right? So people who have massive stage fright, I have several clients who and they're very big performers. Every time before they go out there, throwing up, their stomach's upset. They have, and I have a similar thing. Every time I go teach, I don't want to. I don't want to be in front of a lot of people, but it's what I do, and it's also what I'm good at. So I have to work with myself and with my clients on feeling that particular knot, and often what that knot is, of course, particularly with stage fright and performance anxiety, is people who are highly sensitive. So the not, the no, no, I don't want to go out there. I don't want to feel that much. I don't want to feel that much energy coming at me, makes it so that the body contracts, so that the emotion contracts, so that there's fear, there's panic attacks, there's nausea, there's all of those physical things that happen. But it usually comes from a place of too much inflow, right? Too much feeling, too much sensing, too much perceiving, which of course, when you transcend it or when you open it, is what makes you a great artist, because you can play to the vibe in the room. You can make a room open a certain way when you're sensitive to the feelings of the people in the room. So that's a classic, greatest contraction, greatest gift. And what you can do in that particular moment, and what I work with my clients on, is the bodily relaxation around these clenches. So you learn what it is. There's other ways to do it too, which are a little bit more, I don't know what to call them, wild and esoteric. But
I want to hear about those.
well, we won't be talking about those. Those are tailor-made, but meaning there's another way to open a knot, and one way to open a knot that's not a very therapeutic way, can only be done with very healthy people, is to put somebody into the situation where the knot actually gets tighter and leaving them there till it opens. But that's not a therapeutic approach at all, and can only be done with great trust and in a long-term relationship between the people doing it and all of that. The more common thing is to locate the actual patterns in the body and the mind and the emotions that contract and how they contract, and then work against it with visualization, with relaxation, with breathing, with opening the body, with feeling outwards. One of the more important things in moving through the contraction is that we take the attention away from ourselves. Self focus and self-concern is the number one enemy of that thing, right? Because it's me, 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 which in itself is the shadow, right? The shadow is it's all about me. I need to, me, me, me. And that particular mechanism, of course, comes from the survivals of our childhood. And when that gets transcended, which is a process, and it's developmental and it takes something, but when we can put our attention outwards and feel further out and feel other things and other people, a lot of that contraction just naturally goes away.
Well, that is a beautiful way of describing it, and especially for performers. And I can sense that your work is quite physical, more physical than a therapist, right?
Yes.
You mentioned that you do experiential learning. So you get people into their bodies, you get them to move, you get them to breathe, you get them to visualize.
Yeah, I pretty much, see myself more like a high performance coach or a yogic coach or something like that, and not a therapist. And not coach as in the coaching, the mental coaching, but I deal mostly with the embodiment, the somatic aspects of a human's life and disposition, and how to work with that. Because things like intimacy, sexuality, relationship, you can't armchair those things. You can't read, many have tried and failed. You can't read a good book. You have to actually do these things. You can't think about the intimacy. You have to actually be intimate. And the number one thing that happens when people try to be intimate is that their physical barriers and blocks and their emotional stops are in the way of the interaction. So the first thing to do is to deal with, it's all kinds of reasons why we don't want to be intimate. It's fairly useless. Right. You can take years of therapy on why your mother didn't hug you in that time your wife has left, or your husband. Right. So it's helpful to have emotional and intellectual underpinnings, but it's really important to train the actual body mind to stick with it when it wants to turn away.
Well, I've heard it said that the shadow resides in the body. Isn't this where we stuff our childhood emotions, in the body?
Absolutely.
So that's where the energy is stuck. So it's so brilliant that you're working with the body. Other therapists should do the same. Brilliant. So your work is very influenced by David Data as well. Tell us exactly what you got from working with him, and how his work has influenced you.
Well, that would take several days to describe.
In a nutshell.
To me, David Data is essentially the pioneer of the whole field. Right? It's quite interesting nowadays. Everybody talks about masculine and feminine, and the sacred feminine, and the awakening masculine, and there's many theories that have been built. But he was really the first one, and quite beautifully so, who made sense out of polarity, right? The differences between the masculine and the feminine. Sadly, a lot of that has been very misinterpreted and made into man-woman, which it's not. It has nothing to do with men and women. It has to do with the internal masculine and feminine that we all have. And so, there's a lot of things that have people say it's gender stereotype. It has nothing to do with gender. It has everything to do with our internal landscape and how much of us is oriented one way versus another way. But his precision and his genius in feeling these things is founded in him being an experiential teacher and having taught for 30 years. And he didn't come up with these things sitting around somewhere having a great theory and then doing some studies. He worked hands-on with couples, day in, day out. He'd work with people a month at a time. And so his dedication and who he is as a practitioner and a teacher was incredibly informative to me, and still is. And nowadays I have the pleasure of teaching with him. He teaches very little, but I happen to be privileged to have the studio on the land that we teach out of, and so it's quite fantastic seeing him and how he's refined his work, and how he just has such a laser sharp focus on the issue, and he's just incredibly inspiring to me, and a very good friend and inspiration in many which ways. And so definitely my work's very heavily influenced by that. I've traveled with him now for 12 years and taught and assisted and all kinds of things over the course of the years, and everything else that I've learned before and everything else I've learned after, it has been kind of woven into the foundations of what he's created, and it's quite lovely because it's still an ever-changing body of work, meaning he's revised positions on things as things have changed. The world has changed quite substantially. The relationship between men and women and the way women have developed has changed substantially. So we're constantly growing and developing the offerings based on what's needed. So it's not a set thing and this is the way it is. When people always say David Data says, well, whatever David Data said 12 years ago is not what David Data says today. And that's true for me, and that's true for the women's work I do in the context of what he does. It constantly changes. I just revised position on something that I thought for a while, maybe a month ago, and just moving from there.
So the state of relationships, the dynamic of relationships has been changing, which
Yes.
is why it's so good to have a dynamic way of looking at what's going on. Can you give us some examples of working with a couple in relationship, in intimacy relationships, or maybe drawing from your work with women? how, an example of how the shadow would block greater intimacy, and what you would do maybe to laser in and help a couple to overcome an obstacle, or it might be to help a single person to attract love, or can you give us an example for our viewers that they could maybe practice?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think one of the most glaring things that happen to all of us is that essentially what we're looking for in a partner is something that we didn't receive as a child. And therein lies a fundamental flaw in the system, because of course the thing we never received, we don't have receptors for.
Oh,
right?
That's brilliant. I've never heard that said. That's great. Oh my goodness.
So therein lies a little bit of a conundrum, because essentially we are asking and we're looking for a partner to give us something that we can't receive. And that's the crux of every relationship. That even though we go and we search particularly for somebody, let's just say, this is an example, let's just say you've never been really touched as a child. And so, if I would ask if you would sit with me and you were single, you would say something like, well, one of the things that's really important in my life is that I'm being touched. I want a relationship that's very tactile, where there's a lot of hugging and a lot of kissing and a lot of closeness, because that's what's really important to me. Then you're going to fall in love with somebody. And the way people fall in love is they meet someone and they feel such familiarity. And, in California, we assume it's from a past life.
Yes, it's from our past childhood life.
That's exactly right. It's the memory, it's the ghosts of our childhood, right? It's the imprint, it's the fine fingerprint of our childhood. So they look, to begin with, exactly like the person we wanted, which is what you said in the very beginning. People get together and they fall in love, and it's all so great. I always love that. I have these Facebook friends. They've been, they've just gotten into a relationship 6 months ago. Now they're teaching how to have an awesome relationship. Well, everybody can have an awesome relationship in the first year or two. It's like, once you've been married 7 or 8 years, if you still have something to teach, good.
Yeah, by that time you realize you know nothing.
You know nothing. You don't even know who that person is on the other end of the bed. And that's a good thing, right? But to begin with, it's amazing. And then, over time, you'll have the same complaint that you've always had. Because you don't actually have receptors to it. And I've seen this. I've seen people where the woman goes to the man, "You never touch me. You just don't touch me." And he goes, "But I just touched you. Yeah, when we walked in here, I hugged you." And she goes, "But that wasn't the touch I wanted." And, so the intrinsic shadow of wanting the thing that we can't receive is kind of the scourge of relationship. Because then what happens, right? So you say to a man, "Well, you never hugged me." And he goes, "I just hugged you." And you go, "Well, not like that." Then he'll go, "Okay, if he's a patient man, he'll go, "Okay, I really want to learn how to touch you. Show me how to touch you." "Well, the way you touched me when we first met." "Well, I'm still touching you like this." "No, you are not." And then if he's really patient, he'll go, "Okay, so show me." "Well, if I have to show you, it's not real."
So these are the defenses of the partner trying to keep that touch away from herself.
Yes.
And that's the shadow.
Yeah. And it's an unwinnable battle.
Ugh. Boy, this explains so much. So how would you help that woman to allow herself to feel her partner's touch?
Well, the first and foremost thing is to understand that that's just the way it goes. And then the next thing to do is to realize that you'll never really get it the way you want it. And the only way to ever get out of that particular trap is to give the very thing that you want to receive.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's beautiful.
And that's the only way out.
So you would coach her to touch her husband in a loving manner, the way that she would want to be touched.
No, not the way she wants to be touched, the way he needs to be touched.
Oh, the way he needs to be touched. So you
Right?
teach her to give, and that does what?
It opens that knot, and then you are not in your contraction.
Ah, okay, that's beautiful.
But it has to be for his sake, not for hers.
Yeah. So in giving, that's when we can open up to receive. It's almost like we can't receive until we are open to give.
If we're this tight, there's nothing coming in here, right?
Yes, yes.
So you have to open.
So it's like, I'm not getting this, I'm not getting that, I'm not, as soon as you focus, the me, focusing on everything you're lacking, it's a mindset of lack. I don't have. So in order to have, you give first. Ah, beautiful. Spiritual principle. I love it. Michaela, we've spent a fabulous half hour together. I'm sure that your audience would love to hear how they can get in touch with you and work with you further. So tell us a little bit about maybe an upcoming workshop or two and your website and how best you like to work.
I'm hoping you will spell out my website somewhere on your...
I will, right down below here, michaelaboehm.com.
.com, exactly, because it's hard to spell it out. But yes, michaelaboehm.com, BOEHM.com, right? And the next few things that are coming up is I'm doing something that I love. I only do it once a year. It's called Dancing the Body and the World. And it's September 12th to 14th. It's a women's workshop where we talk about and do embodiment. How does a woman's body move in the world in relationship, for pleasure, for expression? And so, it's not per se a dance workshop. People always think it's a dance workshop. It's a workshop about the embodiment of our heart and our deepest gifts and how that moves in the world. So that's the next thing coming up. Then I'm doing a whole bunch of public workshops that are co-ed workshops, so men and women, doesn't have to be couples. We pair people up if they don't have a partner. One at Esselen at the end of October, which is such a beautiful location. Also doing 3 days in Vancouver, an introduction, a women's workshop, and then an introduction and the co-ed workshop, so couples and singles workshop in Vancouver. And then I'm going to Europe, and I'm actually offering a 5-day intensive, which is very, very in-depth in all the more tantric, yogic, sexual, intimate arts, followed by 2 nights in London and a women's day, a couples and singles day, and an evening intro in Copenhagen. So it's a full schedule.
Wow. You are a busy, busy woman,
Yes.
and we're so lucky that we caught you for a half hour here today. Now, the first women's workshop that you mentioned, that one's in Ojai, the one in September?
That one's in Ojai. Also, I forgot this. This is always something that's a lot of fun. Once a month, the next one is September 9th, I offer an evening practice group for men and women in Santa Monica. So that's, I think, September 9th, October 7th, missing November, and then there's one in December. So that's very easy to go to and gives a good first kind of whiff of things. It's 7 to 10 in Santa Monica. You just show up, we'll match you up, and it's all the foundational principles of intimacy, relationship, David's work, the things I've been doing, and it's different every time. So it's kind of like a yoga class for intimacy.
Wow, beautiful. So if you're in the LA area, that's a great thing to do. So in other words, people should really keep in touch with your website, and everything is there, the whole schedule, the dates, everything.
Yes. Yeah,
because
also on the website there's new like instructional recordings and things like that. We just put a brand new audio for David out the first time in 4 years that something new's out. So there's lots happening on the website always.
fantastic. So again, we're so grateful to have you here. Thank you for your
Thank you so
wisdom. Really has been a tremendous pleasure to get to know you, Michaela.
Thank you. Same here.
Okay. See you all next time. Bye-bye.
Bye.